Hello, everybody! Welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today. Because today we are dusting off an old series of ours. It's been a while since we've done this, and I am very excited for its return. We are, of course, talking about Friends Pitching Fantasy. The series has returned.
Yeah, it's hard to believe we went this long without doing this. This used to be a Friends Talking Fantasy staple. I think it was one of the series that we started doing that helped us get a little bit of traction, get people listening way back. And yeah, we're happy to bring this back to you because Friends Pitching Fantasy, I think it's the most fun way for us to decide what our next couple reads are going to be. But I think we're going to have to explain I don't know if they're rules per se, but at least the process that...
Right.
Yeah, it used to be this very distinct process with like several rounds, but we're loosey-goosey these days on FTF, so it's going to be...
For the better, I'd say.
Should I just explain, Charles?
Yeah, I will say this before you get into the specific details. You know, it's a new year. It's January 2023. We just...
Set the scene, Charles.
We just kicked off our 200 episode special last week, so feels like a new chapter in the world of Friends Talking Fantasy, and so we decided to usher in the new year with new books, and we were like, well, how are we going to pick what we read next? Of course, we're continuing to read through the Stormlight archives, and that will be the next book you'll see us talk about as our continuation of that series. But after that, we gotta read something else. What should we do? And it's like, well, instead of like us picking right now, let's bring back Friends Pitching Fantasy. So that's why we're here. Dylan's got 3 books, I've got 3 books, and we're going to narrow it down to 2, and those are the books we're going to read next in the series. So before we kind of start talking about these books, and before we even decide, we got a long way to go before we figure out what these books actually will be. We have a bit of a process to go through, don't we, Dylan?
We do indeed, Charles. And essentially how it's going to work is in this episode, Charles is going to present 3 books, each accompanied by their own individual pitch. We're expecting it to be around 10 minutes each. And it'll be a period of time where Charles will just have the floor and he'll talk about whichever book he's presenting. And then after he's done, he's made his pitch, his sell of why this should be our next book that we read. Then we'll have a brief sort of Q&A discussion style about it. And I will mostly be asking those questions and Charles will be answering. And he'll just do that 3 times. And eventually we're going to decide, or I get to decide, which of those 3 books that Charles pitched is going to be among our next 2 reads. And it's a fun way for us to decide. I probably will not make that decision until later this week. Give you all a chance on social media to contribute and help us decide, help me decide. And of course, coming up in probably a couple of days, Charles, I will be the pitcher and Charles will be the pitchee. He will be hearing me pitch 3 books and he'll get to make a selection among those. So, yeah, that's pretty much how Friends Pitching Fantasy works.
Exactly right, Dylan. 3 books are going to be pitched and only 1 will be chosen. Dylan will pick from my choices. I'll pick from Dylan's. Today's episode is all about my picks. I'm going to walk everyone through the 3 books that I've kind of selected and kind of my process for why I've selected these. I'm excited about it. These are all books I've been very excited to read. So any one of these will be a winner. If all goes according to schedule, we'll do my books today, which would be a Monday, your books on Wednesday, and then we'll make the decision on Friday. That's kind of the goal, which is a week of stuff, which is more than we have usually done these days. So all very, very exciting. And let's not delay any longer. Shall I just go into my picks?
Yeah, Charles, what's book one of your pitches?
Well, I think I'm going to start by naming all three books and then going into book one from there. And,
Okay.
When I was making these picks, I was trying to figure out, what books do I really want to read next? There's so many classic series that I love, and so many authors that we have to cover that I want to make sure that we get into on the show. But ultimately, I found myself picking things that are relatively new, things like from new authors. None of these books I have read. One of these books I kind of read the first 10%, and I'll get into that. But these are all new reads for both of us, I believe. But their names have come up quite a bit, and they're all relatively new. The oldest one coming out within the past couple years. So a lot of new series here to discuss, and I'm super excited about it. It's very, to me, cutting edge fantasy, which leads me into my first book, which is The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez.
Ooh, what a professional.
Thank you. So The Spear Cuts Through Water came to my attention. It was actually gifted to me over the holidays. A relative of mine knows I'm a big fantasy reader. I guess did their homework and came up with this pick that, when I looked at it, I was like, this looks familiar, but I know nothing about it. And certainly enough, once it entered my mind, I start to see it popping up on social media everywhere. And I think I've just been seeing it over the past couple months. This book came out in August of 2022, so relatively recently, not even a year old. This is the author's second work in fantasy. And first of all, the cover, I happen to have the book with me. The cover is very striking. It's a gorgeous cover. Lots of good praise for this book, but it walks this fine line of I see it everywhere on social media, or I see it frequently pop up on social media of people raving about it, but it doesn't have a lot of reviews, and it doesn't have a lot of popular media attention. So my thought here, Dylan, is that this book is at this really interesting line where it's popular, but I don't think people have realized how popular it is. I think this book presents a really unique opportunity to talk about a very modern, cutting-edge series, and be part of its kind of rise to success. And there's a lot of reasons why I think it's going to be successful. But first, I think I should just kind of read a little bit of the blurb here. It's in this new epic fantasy series from the author of The Vanished Birds, two warriors shepherd an ancient god across a broken land to end the tyrannical reign of a royal family. So a lot of big keywords right there to make a really traditional epic tale. But what struck me from the beginning with this one is what everyone kind of praises about this book is the unique way in which the narration is written. It almost takes this spoken word kind of oral storytelling. It takes a lot from theater in terms of its presentation. There's a lot of action words in here, you sit down and you light a cigarette, and she exhaled, a lot of these kind of action narration. And then also what's interesting about it is the first chapter, the very first page, is in second person, which we've read second person narration before in the widely celebrated 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and we loved that for multiple reasons. And I really enjoyed our conversation around the use of different narration techniques in the 5th season, and how it kind of not only helped with the characterization, but also the thematical development of her story. And I'm seeing a lot of the same kind of techniques being used in this. So I'm getting a lot of 5th season vibes just from what I've heard in the public. But I obviously have not read it, so I can't say for sure. But reviews online, there's very few. Of all the books that I've presented today, it has the fewest number of reviews by a long shot, with like just under 1,000 reviews. So that's kind of small, especially for like a new release, a popular release in the fantasy genre. But it's got an interesting mix. People who love it go on about how the atmosphere that this book creates, and like the way in which the story is told, is both kind of challenging but also inspiring and exciting, and that's what a lot of people love about this book. And I think for you and me, Dylan, as people that have read a lot of fantasy, I think there's a lot of new ideas in terms of like the writing process being beautifully executed in this, or at least being praised for its execution in this, that I think we would really be interested in. And I'm just super curious to see what this book is about. It's kind of been sneaking around, almost like this cult following status, and it's hitting a lot of the same keywords and buzzwords and themes that something like the 5th season has done, which obviously, swept the Hugo's, huge release. And it's piqued my interest, and it seems to focus a lot on this adventure storytelling, I think more so than the 5th season, and that also is kind of like a spin that I'm interested in. And yeah, it just is one of those things that people say is immersive, is inspiring, is different, is unique, is interesting, and that's what I think we should be bringing to the table with Friends Talking Fantasy. It's like, I think we have the opportunity to read a book that's both different, interesting, challenging, and popular. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to have conversations around this book that I think is underserved today. So I'm saying let's, take a risk on it, and it was gifted to me and I want to read it, so I'm gonna read it anyway. So let's read it on the show. And that's kind of my fast pitch for The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez.
Well, you've certainly piqued my interest, Charles. Strong pitch, way to come out of the gates there. I'm really curious. It's got a beautiful cover, for sure, and just the aesthetic of it, you could see how it would be immersive, like you're talking about. Do you get a sense from any of the reviews or anything you've looked at of what kind of setting we're dealing with here? Is it more of that like pseudo medieval Europe sort of setting that might fit with some of those classic epic fantasy elements that you're seeing, or is it another culture that's inspired this? It's okay if you don't know. I honestly
don't know. It's written as like an adventure story, and an intimate exploration of identity, legacy, and belonging. It definitely, and it's always described as a saga, which I also find interesting. But there seems to be a lot of like nature invoked in this. Like, I'm looking through it, and it's got a lot of like very intricate art of animals and fish and mountains and plains, and I think it is taking place. It's got like royal families and emperors and things like that. And the cover is guys holding spears and these like tribal like clothing here. So it leads me to believe it's something. I can't even know what it would be like, and it doesn't really say. And I think that's a big part of this. It's such like a personal story from what I'm gathering, but it does seem to invoke a lot of nature and tribal like elements in its setting, and that's the best I can do, having not read it. And there's warriors and things like that, moon thrones and gods and things. But yeah, people don't really go on too much about the actual setting, like some books that we've read, like Poppy War, for example, or Jade City, or The Age of Madness, Final Strife, where the setting is such a crucial part. I just think it's set up like, I hate to invoke Avatar: The Last Airbender again, or even honestly Avatar the movies, because they both kind of they're very blue.
I was going to say we're not talking Cameron.
Maybe
but
both.
We are talking both Cameron and The Last Airbender here.
Like,
all avatars have been
blue,
invoked.
So I'm invoking both there.
Blue is just everything blue. is Avatar now.
Yeah, pretty much.
This is literally the third episode in a row, I think, that you have discussed avatars, like either Last Airbender or the Cameron movie. So that's just a tidbit for the listeners. But I find that interesting because it seems like it's such a big thing in these modern fantasy books that people get focused on what inspired this culture, what inspired this world, and this idea of it's immersive. You start wondering, like, immersive into what kind of world, but it doesn't evoke, just looking at the cover and what people are saying, it doesn't evoke that typical medieval, like, castles and feudal system, like that kind of stuff. Even if it does have royal families, it does have a whole other, like, look and feel, at least from what I'm seeing on the cover and what you're describing. So sounds like that part is pretty fresh, even if it's it's harder to point to the inspiration. How long is the book, Charles? Looks pretty big.
This book looks big, but the pages are actually quite don't have a lot of print. It's 522 pages, but it's got lots of big spaces and wide margins and things, so I don't really know for sure. But I think of all the books I'm going to pitch today, I think it's the longest, but I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But even then, it's not that long. Certainly shorter than Oathbringer, which we're reading right now, is Doorstopper.
Yeah, Chihuahua Killer, as we like to say. It doesn't look like you have to be worried about keeping this book near your pets. It's not quite Oathbringer levels, but it sounds like it's got some length to it. I think it's something that you said that I guess I want to follow up on a little bit is you said a second book that Jimenez has written in fantasy. What was the deal with the first book? Is a standalone? Do you know anything about it? The
Vanished Birds. I know nothing about it. It's not related to this story, but all over this, like when I Google the author Simon Jimenez and like even in this, like the author of The Vanished Birds, like it's everywhere. So that could be another one we could read someday, but I don't know. I didn't research it, but it is a fantasy book as well. So there you go. And those are the two books he's written. So relatively younger author.
Is this? Did you mention this already? Is it a standalone or the first in a series?
I believe, it doesn't say. I believe it's a standalone. It doesn't seem to be. It doesn't say like part of a series. It just says a novel. So, usually these
new books often do the standalone with sequel potential.
Exactly.
So we'll see.
That could be the case here, but it is presented as its own story. So I don't know what we'll really get.
I love me a standalone, a story that can tell the whole thing in the space of 500
I think all the books I'm
pages
pitching today are standalones too, which is
really
which is exciting.
That's very interesting, Charles. Yeah, I'm excited by this idea of revisiting. It sounds like that epic quest style fantasy to some extent. It seems like it's got a lot of that travel across the lands, and I think that always harkens back to these Lord of the Rings style stories. And I think meanwhile it's exploring these really modern themes like identity in a way that it sounds like is, as you've said, cutting edge. So it's definitely piqued my interest, Charles.
Right.
I'm excited by
although
the
it's an adventure story, there's also every reviewer is like the storytelling is so unique and creative and different. So I think it's going to be like we're not going to get the typical like ho-hum story of a humble sheep herder going off and fighting the Dark One, but I think we are going to get
call him a shepherd.
You're gonna get there's this reviewer here on Goodreads that goes by Ash, who goes, the storytelling was amplified, the emotions heightened by various sensory experiences, and yet again, Jimenez shows us his writing and storytelling skills. And then they go on to say this, like, so these, like, sensory experiences, these emotional connections, this oral storytelling is something that keeps popping up, and I think it'll be a standout read for us. I don't think we're going to have read anything quite like it. The closest things I would say are the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin and the Final Strife by Sara El-Arifi. Those are the vibes that I'm getting, just in terms of like storytelling. Like Sara El-Arifi uses a lot of spoken word to tell moments of their story, and N.K. Jemisin experiments with different point of view, and I think this book does both of those things, like the rhythmic storytelling, the sensory storytelling, and also the experimentation with point of view. So that's what I think makes it worth consideration.
Definitely worth consideration. People like the second person.
It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag, and I think that's why the series hasn't taken off like some of its contemporaries that came out in 2022 that have exploded. And I just think it's a book that's hard to recommend. I think a lot of people are having a hard time like determining who to recommend this to, and I think the experimental narration is very rewarding, but for some people looking for a more casual reading experience, it might be asking a bit much for them. But I think for us, we're always looking for something different and interesting, and we've read a bunch of fantasy books that I think we'd be the ideal fit for a story like this. But that's just like keeping it off maybe like the airport bookshelves, That's kind of like the one I'm like, could it be a quick grab on an airport bookshelf? You might be asking a lot for this one, but I don't know. I haven't read it, and I think it's something that is definitely worth considering.
I will definitely consider it, Charles, and I'm in the same camp as you, where I've seen it a bunch of times on social media, but it's great to hear what it's actually about, because I feel like that's the part that's been missing. So I'm excited by the idea of this one, and I think unless there's more for you to say before we move on to the next one, I think the next pitch is in order.
Yes. So I'll just read the last paragraph of the review, and then I'll close it out. Both a sweeping adventure story and an intimate exploration of identity, legacy, and belonging, The Spear Cuts Through Water is an ambitious and profound saga that will transport and transform you, and is like nothing you've ever read before. I mean, that's written on the sleeve of the book, so take that for what you will, but I think it's a great way to kind of summarize it. Someone said
Does it say who that's
No, it's literally
from?
part of the book description. Like, the publisher wrote that about the book. So, it's not like
that's like me being like, Friends Talking Fantasy is an incredible podcast with
it's like
lightning fast
in our
pacing,
bio, it's like two friends that love to talk fantasy, and it's the most profound podcast you'll ever hear. There's nothing like it. It's the same vibes. But at least it's on par
both
with
hosts
the reviews.
Are extremely handsome with great senses of humor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But the next book on my list also has a bit of a water theme and a gorgeous cover that I don't have in front of me, but also lots of blues in it, is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I'm assuming it's pronounced Klune. I don't know for sure. But this one is by far the most reviewed. I said that The Spear Cuts Through Water has just under 1,000 reviews. Well, House on the Cerulean Sea has 402,000 ratings on Goodreads. So a whole nother...
A mere 402,000.
It was the Goodreads Choice Award in 2020, and it was a nominee for Best Fantasy Novel. New York Times bestseller. It's like a Barnes & Noble darling I've seen. I feel like every time I walk into Barnes & Noble, they're really pushing this book and the other book by this author, which is escaping me. But there was a time where that was like by the register and on the front door of like every Barnes & Noble I walked into. So props to TJ Klune for kind of breaking through. And I think you can see why. There's a lot of interesting themes kind of picked at and explored in this. The genres, according to Goodreads, are fantasy, fiction, LGBT, romance, young adult, and that all is kind of personified in T.J. Klune. He's very much a fantasy writer, but he's also very funny. That's the thing that I think kind of shines through in this book. You know, I said one of these books I'd read a little bit, and it was this one. This one's been on my radar for a long time, and I think we're both in the same boat, Dylan. You know, we've been reading a lot of Stormlight Archive, and that's thousands and thousands of pages of epic, classic swords and sorcery style fantasy, obviously in Sanderson's trailblazing ways, but it is very much your typical kind of fantasy story. And we've read a lot of more traditional fantasy works, and I feel like, to me, when I was looking at the house in the Cerulean Sea, and I looked at that cover, and it's a house on a cliff overlooking the water, very tranquil looking, very colorful, very playful looking. I was like, you know what? This could be the breath of fresh air that I'm looking for, not only in like the narration, which is very like lighthearted and comedy forward. There's like a joke a minute here, and not necessarily like punchlines, but even just in the narration. Like we praise Abercrombie a lot on not holding back on making fun of his characters through narration, like, oh, Giselle was dimly aware of this. It's like TJ Klune does the same thing, I'd say punched up even more. And then you have the concept as well. It takes place in a lot more modern era. Like, you've got the main character who's a caseworker in the department in charge of magical youth, and he's just kind of looking at the well-being of children with magical powers who are almost in like foster care or in other detention, like government sanctioned orphanages, I believe is the term. So it's in that case a very unique story for us, and that's kind of what grabbed me. It's like, I could use a lighter read, something more focused on humor, something that's not part one of a 10,000 page saga, or that's gonna have people killing each other with swords and stuff. Like I want that kind of change of pace, and House in the Cerulean Sea promises that. I'll just read a quick blurb about the background here. A magical island, a dangerous task, a burning secret. Linus Baker leads a quiet, solitary life. At 40, he lives in a tiny house with a devious cat and his old records. As a caseworker at the department in charge of magical youth, he spends his days overseeing the well-being of children in government-sanctioned orphanages. When Linus is unexpectedly summoned by extremely upper management, all caps, he's given a curious and highly classified assignment. Travel to the Marsyas Island Orphanage, where 6 dangerous children reside, and then it goes into all the children. Linus must set aside his fears and determine whether or not they're likely to bring about the end of days. So we got our unlikely hero, this kind of overweight, middle-aged, solitary man, as he navigates both bureaucracy and like the taking care of these children who could potentially, they're children, so there's innocence that comes with that, but they have these world-threatening powers, and I don't really know where it goes from there. Again, it was funny. I was on vacation with my family in California, and we were at a bookstore in San Diego, and I talked my mom into buying this book for her. I'm like, read it and tell me how it is, and if it's good, then I'll read it, because I was very curious about it, but I was committed to reading other stuff at the time. And then while we were on vacation, it was just sitting there in our hotel, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to sneak a peek. And I read the first, maybe 10% of this book, and I was enjoying it quite a bit. It was fun, it was a light read, it was entertaining, it was different, it was satirical, and I really want to finish it and see where it goes. All the reviews are very positive, tons and tons of them, obviously, and it's put TJ Klune in the limelight. It's such a popular read. I think the only New York Times bestseller I have here, I don't think the next book I'm going to talk about is a New York Times bestseller, but super popular release, and I think it's just kind of a different offering compared to what we've read and discussed on the show so far. I think it'll be a nice change of pace, both for us and for our listeners. And I think you'll appreciate the humor. I think you'll appreciate the unique character work and the unique characters that TJ Klune is able to create. And I think there's a lot in the satirical side and like in the thematic side that we could get into a surprising amount of depth in. Although this book presents itself as pretty lighthearted and there's a joke a minute, I still think there's an opportunity to have some really good conversation around what this book is about and some of the themes that are worth diving into. So I think there's a very valuable conversation that we could be had there that I'm super looking forward to having if you pick this book. That is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune.
Marvelous pitch there, Charles. I'm really interested in this one. It's, again, like you said, it is all over the place when you go into bookstores. Everyone seems to love it, and it sounds like it's Charles's mom approved, which
I don't think she's read it yet. I don't know.
Love to hear. Oh, she didn't read it? Oh,
maybe
lent
she
it to
did
her,
by
Charles,
now.
and she's just letting it sit there. A while ago you said
well, she bought it. It's
reading
hers.
and enjoying it.
I talked her into buying it, and then I cracked the cover.
Gotcha.
And peek at it.
Yeah.
Maybe she
All
read it. I should ask her.
it's definitely should have asked her to prepare for the pitch, because we all know that Charles's mom is a master of book recommendation, based on the episode where it was book recommendations from Charles's mom. So check out that episode. But all right, Charles. So this book, you said a joke a minute. In your experience, did that ever get annoying? Because sometimes I find, there's some like comedy books that we've read that will remain nameless that sometimes it just feels trying too hard and all that. You like the sense of humor even at that rate?
I would say I definitely was feeling it, but it doesn't overstay its welcome, at least in the bit I've read and then from what I hear in people's reviews. It's not if it was like a Chihuahua killer size story of Sanderson style and then there's a million books, then maybe it would get old. But I think this is a pretty light read. People describe it as wholesome, and people describe it as fun, and I think it's all part of that kind of quirky vibe that it encapsulates. So I think if you know it going in and you love it for what it is, I don't think it overstays its welcome. And certainly I don't see any criticisms of the humor. In fact, I think most people, I don't even see much criticism for the story. And like, it's really people saying, oh, this book is so cute, it's so wholesome. Some people said it made me cry. Like, those are all the praise it's getting. So I think it's able to, and maybe it's just at the beginning. It might even be like more jokey than it gets towards the end. But I think it's all part of the story that it's trying to get you through. And this combination of dealing with like hopeless magical orphans and like a cubicle worker, like pencil pusher guy at the center of this story with jokes and also mature themes. So who knows? But I think it's worth the risk. I mean, 400,000 people can't be wrong. And I think because we haven't read anything like very rarely have we read like a book as wholesome and comedy forward as this for the show, that I think it will be a nice breath of fresh air for us and kind of break up the pace of things that we're reading along the way, because as much as we love to do things like Fifth Season and Abercrombie and Sanderson, it's like those books can get kind of depressing for a while. Like they keep you down for a long time for the drama, but this is going to be a totally different experience, and I think we should kind of welcome that, should we choose to read this story.
I always welcome a breath of fresh air in our reading, Charles. And it sounds like it manages, while being optimistic like that, to still approach a lot of these big themes. That's exciting. Did you see that already starting to show up when you were about 10% in?
No,
or
it
you
was
feel like
really
that's
just
stuff
kind of
that shows
showing
up
the
later?
main character and how, like, he's kind of stuck in the cog of, like, the corporate hierarchy. And you saw that joke already of extreme upper management and, like, the bureaucracy. And then, his life is very solitary and, seemingly insignificant, and like he comes home to his cat and plays his record, but his neighbor makes fun of him, and then he goes to work and his boss makes fun of him. It's like that was where I was starting from, so I didn't get any deeper into it than that, but it was kind of setting up this character and making jokes about their kind of like very mediocre existence, which I think is going to change quite a bit as the story goes on. It's just a feeling, but you never know.
Sounds like it. I was interested to hear this idea that it sounds like the stakes are a lot higher than I thought they would be in this book, right? It was like, oh, they're trying to avoid the end of times or something. I was like, oh, wow. I always thought of this as more slice of life and not having those level of stakes.
Yeah, so well, I guess like in this world, like imagine if like the X-Men kind of thing existed, which I don't know if this is how the world is set up. I didn't get the full picture, but I kind of was like, okay, it's like X-Men where some people are born with powers and some aren't. But then what if like a 5-year-old is born with the power to create like atomic bomb blasts but they have no parents and they're in an orphanage. It's like now the government has to take care of them, and you can imagine like the ineffectual, slow bureaucracy facing something as crucial as raising a child with these kind of uncontrollable powers, and how those two things might clash in a humorous way, but also in like a thought-provoking way too, about the system in which we care for people like that. So I don't know, it seems to be an interesting premise, and the idea that you can have like orphans that have these like potentially high implicating superpowers. It's like they're kind of falling through the cracks of the system, but also you can't ignore them because they can do incredible things with their magical abilities. So it is an interesting premise.
Sounds like one. I've heard described as a hug in book form, which is so nice. You say
I see really wholesome a lot. I see like OMG, so cute, I'm dying. Like, I see that kind of stuff all throughout the Goodreads page, and that kind of piques my interest. And you get that from the cover too. It just seems very colorful and fun, and that's what pulled me towards it. Because like the spear cuts through water, I think is going to be really great, but I don't think it's going to be as wholesome and fun as how some of the Cerulean Sea is going to be. So that's kind of like a differentiator right there, even though they're both very water focused. I think it's going to be like the difference between reading the 5th season or like a lighthearted comedy, It's just like there's going to be a difference there, but both have their strengths.
Well, Charles, that's a great sell for this one, and I will have to thoroughly consider both of the books you presented so far.
But wait.
But
there's more.
There is one more that I'm sure I'll have to provide deep consideration
for. You will, because although The House in the Cerulean Sea is by far the most popular in terms of people that have read it and reviewed it by a long shot, there is a book, my third book here, that kind of hit the nerve of our show and the people that we interact with on social media. And as a result, I think we have seen this book appear and have recommended to us more than either of the other two, even though it is not this New York Times best-selling, huge release, 400,000 reviews. It does have 12,000 ratings, so it kind of is closer to The Spear Cuts Through Water than The House in the Cerulean Sea, but it is nothing to shy away at. I'm, of course, referring to The Blacktongue Thief, by Christopher Buehlman, I'm going to attempt to pronounce that. Apologies if I got it wrong.
Looks like Buehlman.
Buehlman. Yeah, that could be right. I like that.
Uh,
So this one, Dylan, I think is right up our alley in like what we read traditionally, in terms of like focus on character work, and you got a bunch of rogues, and I'll get into the story in a bit. But before I do, I just want to point out that we have been recommended this book a bunch of times. It was first published in March 2021, so it's still relatively new. Let's see, when was The House in the Cerulean Sea published? I'm going to pull that up right now. March 2020, so it's the second oldest. It came out a year later, but when we used to do like recommendation series, it would always make its way onto the list. Like our friends on social media are constantly telling us to read it, and then you scroll through the Goodreads page and it's all the usual suspects of people that we talk to and that are in our circle of friends and peers on the bookish community. They're all here praising it. Then you have big authors too. Of the 3 books, this is the only one where I saw like actual like big name authors leaving their reviews and their endorsements. The 2 that come to the top of the list are Robin Hobb and Nicholas Eames, 2 very nice names to have at the top of your Goodreads page, leaving you 5 stars. So that's just something to consider right there. A little bit about the Blacktongue Thief and what it is about. So you have a character, Kinch, K-I-N-C-H, owes the Takers Guild a small fortune for his education as a thief, which includes, but is not limited to, lockpicking, knife fighting, wall scaling, blah, 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 plus a few small magics. His debt has driven him to lie in wait by the old forest road, planning to rob the next traveler that crosses his path. But today, Kinch has picked the wrong mark. Galva is a knight, a survivor of the brutal goblin wars, and handmaiden of the goddess of death. She is searching for her queen, missing since a distant northern city fell to giants. Unsuccessful in his robbery and lucky to escape with his life, Kinch now finds his fate entangled with Galva's. Common enemies and uncommon dangers force thief and knight on an epic journey where goblins hunger for human flesh, krakens hunt in dark waters, and honor is a luxury few can afford. So right off the bat, we're getting hit with a lot of elements that we traditionally grab onto enthusiastically. You've got thieves, rogues, adventures, monsters, like unlikely alliances, a little bit of humor, a strong duo, it seems like, unlikely duo. And then when you combine that with the glowing endorsement of all of our peers, it's hard to ignore. And what interests me most about this book is that a lot of people compare it to authors that we grab onto, including Nicholas Eames and Joe Abercrombie himself. So the fact that we're getting all these big names, everyone's recommended it to us, it hits all of our checklists and what we traditionally love and look for in fantasy. It's hard to ignore, and I think we gotta get into it. What's interesting about the author, Christopher Buehlman, is like you look up his Wikipedia page and it's like the man's done everything. He's a comedian, a novelist, a playwright, a poet. I think in terms of his writing career, he started off in horror, and now he's like started a very strong, prominent fantasy debut with this novel. And so I think we're gonna get a really strong perspective. I love kind of that horror influence. I hope it creeps its way in here, and with flesh-eating goblins in the description, I feel like it's going to. And I feel like you're going to get that rogue-like thief character. I think you're going to get, where it says honor is a luxury if you can afford. I think we're going to get into that characterization that I know you always are intrigued by with other books that we've read. Like Among Thieves vibes a little bit there. It's
shout out to MJ Kuhn.
Shout out. I think it's to me, it's just one I think we have to read at some point. It's been recommended to us so much we can't not read it. And if you're looking for kind of a return to form for stuff that we love and want to continue reading, it's like this is such a great place to start. And I've even seen like Mark Lawrence had started reading it a few weeks ago, and his comment was like, I'm finally getting into this to see what all the like commotion's about, and it was the Blacktongue Thief. So it's like I think a lot of people in the community are kind of picking up on this. It's already been a couple years, but I mean, this is one I don't see how we can skip over it. I think we have to get on this one and see what it's about, and how many of our friends and peers have to read it and recommend it before we get into it as well. And it's got rogues and thieves, Dylan. That's your like niche right there. So, come on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is the number one reason that I gravitate to it, of course. It sounds, I love this idea of the odd couple, right? The foils for each other who get forced together as well. It sounds a little bit like Royce and Hadrian of the Rhaenyra Revelations mix, where Royce was that more thief roguish character and Hadrian was more of that noble knight character. And that's one of my favorite duos, hard stop in fantasy. Do you see those kind of, I guess, if not explicit comparisons to those two, do you see people saying like this is a great duo as well?
Most people that I see like in my research are praising the author's voice more than anything else. Like Robin Hobbs said, the narrator has a tongue-in-cheek style that does not diminish the validity of the story. And then you have Nicholas Eames saying, holy hell, this was awesome, so funny, so harrowing, so endlessly inventive. Almost every page made me laugh or wonder at some phenomenally clever turn of phrase. Cannot wait to see where the story goes from here. Characterizations mentioned somewhat, but it's not like you know, Royce and Hadrian or anything like
Locke and John.
Locke and John, thank you. That's who I was struggling to remember. Yeah, so not at those levels. I don't think people recommend this as a duo story, but maybe it is. I mean, it's grimdark. It certainly seems to be set up that way, but it seems like these two are an unlikely pairing. It's not like Royce and Adrian where they're BFFs. I think they're kind of forced to hang out together. I mean, we'll see the situation. I don't really know, but yeah, just like I think most people praise it for being like a modern grimdark novel with like a humor that just kind of, and wit that kind of clicks with the genre that we are so desperately always looking for. That like I think Abercrombie is kind of our gold standard for that, and it's a hard mark to hit sometimes without being either too edgy or too humorous, and it sounds like everyone's praising him for that more than anything else.
I love this idea of a really eclectic author. All those facets of his background almost sounds like our friend Christian Cameron.
Yeah, it does.
Also writes under Miles Cameron, this like jack of all trades, and we know we love Christian's books, so that's exciting to think about. Did you mention the horror background that he has? Did you see that popping up in any of the reviews or things people are saying about it, or not really? I would love to see horror elements in this book as well, given his background. But is anyone talking about that?
I mean, people say that there's a lot of kind of this world building going on, and they mention all of the creatures, and they say things that there's memorable characters, creatures, moments, cultures. But I think more people go down the humor route than the horror route. So I think it is going to be a bit of a departure. But I'd be curious to read it for myself and see like if there's any horror elements that were pulled and how they were kind of incorporated into this. I mean, we're talking about flesh-eating goblins and krakens and all these other kind of thief robbery moments that are ripe for a little touch of horror, but I definitely think this is a different avenue in terms of like grimdark fantasy adventure that's got like this witty, humorous voice behind it. I think that's kind of the focus, and horror is a backseat. Like no one's really talking about it that I've seen.
Right. Well, I already bought a copy of this book a while back because when it first came out, it was one of the books that just whenever I see Thief or Rogue, already gravitating toward it, and
Yeah.
then I was hearing such amazing things. So this one, it has that extra bonus of being a book that I already own, so that helps. And on top of it, yeah, my favorite character archetype is the Rogue and Thief. I know a lot of our listeners associate me with those kind of books, right? Liza Locke Lamora, Among Thieves, and I love the idea of injecting it with some comedy as well.
Yeah.
So Charles, this is going to be a really tough decision for me between these three books. You did not make it easy on me. I'll say a lot of times coming into FPF, like when I know which three books you're going to be pitching, I'm like, okay, this one's a favorite. He's going to have to really deliver a strong pitch on one of the other two for me to really seriously consider them. This time, Charles, I don't know. I'm kind of stumped. I'm kind of glad we switched up the format right now.
So I'm not putting you on the spot.
Okay, let's take a little time. Let's get a little feedback, and then we'll announce it later on. Because, geez, Charles, I'm stumped, and you delivered great pitches for all three of them.
Right. And to
I don't
recap,
know,
folks,
Charles. I don't know. I'm going to have to really think this one over.
You really are, and you have three tough choices here, and that's like the inspiration for me to pick these was like these are all books that I really want to read that I haven't read yet that I would hungrily pick up next. I don't even know which one I would pick up next. It's like a hard choice, so I'm really excited to have made this kind of combination. And it's The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. So that's going to be a tough call. You know, maybe what will help your decision, Dylan, is we share these choices with our friends over on social media, get them to weigh in. Maybe someone can help you decide one way or the other. I think the good news is there's going to be no wrong answer here. And I'm curious to also give it some time to see what other people think about these choices. I think this is a pretty cutting edge, creative little mix here that's got a little something for everybody. So I'm proud of it. I am so eager to see what you're going to pick. I'm so eager to see, like, maybe we should do like a little poll. Like, what do you think Dylan will pick? Just to get a kind of vibe check. But then if you don't pick the most popular one, I don't know. But I don't want to sway you that way. But I'd be curious to see. I don't know how we're going to do it. I'll leave that up to you as our social media guru. But so many exciting ideas here to sit on and consider.
Thank you, Charles. I'm definitely going to need your help, listener. Don't leave me out here on my own because I don't know. I'm absolutely flummoxed by this decision here.
I've been sitting with these books. I made this list a week ago, and I still don't know which I'd pick first. So you got some hard work.
Right. You kind of just picked three books atop your TBR and then outsourced your choice because it's a difficult choice to me.
That's what's great about FPF.
That's one of the benefits of FPF is it's so hard, right? It's always hard to pick when you're so excited about several books to pick which one. And I know I do have three correct. Yeah.
This is the first case where
three correct choices here.
Yeah, you have three correct choices. And I hope I did them justice pitching. It's hard to pitch three books that you have not read. So I'm going purely off of reviews and marketing and my own intuition. But it's kind of fun because it's how I would pick a book to read normally anyway. So it's like, here's kind of the shout lines, here's the response, here's the vibes I'm picking up. Where do you go from there? So yeah, I'm curious to see where you'll go. You know, I picked some more to your taste and more as like a palate cleanser. So we'll see which direction you're going to go in. But yeah, and I guess you'll have to see us over on social media. I think for now we need to stop, and then we need to see what your pitches are going to be. I think we've kind of sat with these books long enough. You have all the information you're going to get, except for audience reaction over the next couple of days. So I think, Dylan, there's nothing left but to play that sweet, sweet outro music.
I think it is time to play that sweet, sweet outro. Wait, before we do it, should we just, not with the music going, tell people where they can find us on social media?
We're going to repeat it anyway once the music.
Because it's a little... Yeah, we'll repeat it because we do our whole shtick. But you can find us on Twitter at the FTF Podcast 1. And you can find us on Instagram at the FTF Podcast. So those are really the two best places to reach out. I'm sure I'll be posting some tweets just trying to get some help from you. And you don't have to wait for that. You can at us, as the kids are maybe saying, on social media, and just let me know. I really need it this time. So
I'm
no
so
further
curious
ado,
to see
let's
myself.
I literally, like, this is not me playing up to, like, oh, what are you going to be? It's like, I literally do not know.
Like, this will be a key influence in your decision making.
Oh, very key, yeah. So, please help. But with no further ado, I think it is time for a little bit of sweet, sweet outro music, Charles.
All right, let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping. Thank you all so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today and you want to support the show, the best place to do that is over on social media. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end on Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard and they want to support the show even more than following us on social media and engaging with us over there, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. You can now do that over on Spotify. That's where most of you are listening. And it's just 2 clicks to make that happen on top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast page, and it does absolute wonders for our little indie podcast here that we do for the love of the game.
Love of the game,
and
baby.
You can always do a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts as well, but just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Absolutely, Dylan. Just listening is already more than enough. Thank you so much for listening to us today. And as always, guys, go forth and conquer, friends.